My teeth are chattering from the cold, and steam escapes from my mouth with each exhale. I stand on the side of the highway, looking at the sign Boston 5 miles, and waiting for Lisa to call a taxi. Last night drained the last of my strength. We argued until dawn, desperately trying to find a way out of the dead end this damned life has driven us into. Once again, I made a mistake by trusting the scammers. They promised golden mountains for my brilliant idea of a dating app. But in the end, they drained all our savings. Lisa was furious when she found out we were completely broke. We couldn't pay the mortgage, and we'd have to forget about having a child, too. "Danny, the taxi will be here in 15 minutes, Lisa says, returning to my frozen figure. Her eyes are swollen from crying. I nod in response, unable to find the words. For a while, we silently stare at the road. "I'm sorry. I ruined everything. I hate myself for plunging us into this mess." "Well, what's done is done," Lisa sighs. "The main thing now is to figure out where to go. My mother has always invited us to live with her." I frown at the mere thought of her mother, the widowed Eleanor. This woman made me nervous since our first meeting. She was constantly sticking her nose where it didn't belong, trying to control our lives. Moving in with her meant losing the last shreds of independence. But we had no choice. We needed a place to lay low, sort out our finances, and Eleanor was our only respite. "Danny, my boy, I'm so glad you're here." Eleanor pulled me into a tight hug as soon as we stepped over her doorstep. Her enthusiasm about our arrival was in stark contrast to Lisa's gloomy mood and my embarrassment. Eleanor's house, small but well-kept, exuded an atmosphere of coziness and peace. "Make yourselves at home. Feel like you're at home," she continued, curtsying and gesticulating. "Lisa, sunshine, I'm so happy you've finally returned under your mother's wing." Lisa rolled her eyes in response to the effusive welcome. Eleanor had always been overly expressive and overbearing, especially when it came to her only daughter. The first few weeks of living with my mother-in-law were unbearable. I felt cornered, deprived of any room to maneuver. Eleanor was constantly hovering nearby, giving unsolicited advice, trying to control our every move. Lisa and I argued over trifles as the stressful situation did not contribute to harmony. The only place where I could catch a breath of freedom was Eleanor's garden. It was a picturesque corner of nature, hidden from prying eyes by a high fence. Well-groomed flower beds, neatly trimmed bushes and trees created a sense of a serene oasis. Every morning I would escape the house to spend a couple of hours in the garden, enjoying the peace and quiet. Digging in the dirt, weeding, I would find my balance, forget about my problems. And one day, I bumped into Eleanor, who was hard at work in the vegetable patches, covered in dirt and sweat. "Oh, Danny, I see you appreciate a gardener's work too?" She noticed me and smiled warmly. I nodded, picking my words. It turned out that her burning passion was gardening, which she had been into since her youth. Eleanor proceeded to describe the technique of properly planting petunias, sharing tricks for growing perfect roses. Her eyes sparkled when she delved into this sea of botanical terms and tips. That day, I saw her in a completely different light, not constantly obsessed with petty control, but a person who adored her craft. And in the following days, Eleanor and I spent more and more time in the garden, digging in the dirt side by side. The casual conversation and shared passion allowed us to establish a connection that had long been unable to form. Weeks turned into months, and my estrangement from Lisa only deepened. Most of the time, I immersed myself in gardening, almost abandoning my job search. Eleanor, in turn, became my only close companion, with whom I shared every day and literally every vegetable patch. The garden was not just our hobby, but also a refuge where we escaped from external worries. For hours, sitting on a bench surrounded by fragrant flowers, we discussed books, philosophy, the meaning of life. Eleanor read a lot, was well-read and intelligent. Her thoughts made me look at many things in a new way. Once, the topic of physical intimacy came up in conversation. Eleanor talked about how much she missed embraces after becoming a widow. For several years now, she had been terribly lonely. "This is the worst punishment, to experience a lack of touch. You understand?" Tears stood in her eyes. "Marital affection is the simplest human happiness, and I've completely become unaccustomed to it." Her candor touched something inside me. I hadn't had intimacy with Lisa for a long time either. We had drifted apart, becoming almost strangers. And Eleanor was sitting so close that I could feel the warmth of her body, the intoxicating scent of her perfume. Unexpectedly, I pulled her towards me and kissed her hungrily. Eleanor responded with a passion that had been pent up for so long. We gathered each other in our arms right there, in our garden, heedless of the dirt and dust. For the first time in many months, I felt alive again. After that fateful day, our bond only grew stronger. We devoted every spare minute to each other, as if making up for all the years of loneliness and hardship. My deception towards Lisa deepened, but the happiness with Eleanor was so all-consuming that nothing else mattered anymore. "Danny, what's been going on with you lately?" Lisa looked at me sideways, her arms folded across her chest. "You're in the clouds, ignoring me, constantly disappearing somewhere." I stumbled, searching for words. Lying to Lisa was becoming increasingly difficult. My consciousness was poisoned by Eleanor. Her image incessantly haunted me day and night. "I'm just spending a lot of time in the garden. It helps me focus, find peace." Lisa snorted in disbelief. "Peace? You're slaving away there for 16 hours a day, as if nothing in the world exists except those vegetable patches." She was right. I had completely dropped out of reality. The garden and Eleanor overshadowed the rest of the world for me. I had lost my job and made no attempt to find a new one, limiting my circle of communication to my mother-in-law alone. "I understand that gardening is your hobby, your outlet," Lisa continued, pacing the room anxiously. "But lately Mom only talks about you. I get the feeling that she sees you more than I do." Lisa fell silent after making that horrific assumption. Her cheeks flushed, and her hands began to tremble. It seemed she was closing in on unraveling our secret with Eleanor. "Wait! Are you two together?" Lisa's words made me completely crimson. "With your own mother? That's perversion." "No!" I jumped up, trying to stifle the topic. "It's not like that. There's nothing between us." But it was too late. I could see it in Lisa's gaze, in which jealous rage flashed mixed with disgust. She wanted to believe, but couldn't. Too many hints gave away our incestuous affair. That night we had another fierce argument. Lisa forced me to choose, either her or Eleanor. Her words burned like napalm. But I had already made a decision that I was afraid to tell her. In the morning I crawled into Eleanor's bed. Her frail arms instinctively wound around my body. Her lips pressed against mine in a passionate kiss. "It's so hot today. Why don't we tidy up the garden and go for a swim in the pond?" she purred, tickling me with her breath. I nodded, and we got out of bed, dressing on the go. Eleanor always maintained her sexuality and attractiveness despite her age. The sight of her bare back and firm buttocks, outlined by the fabric of her panties, inflamed me over and over again. We headed to the garden, passing Lisa's room. I silently prayed that she would never find out. Work was in full swing. Eleanor and I tirelessly weeded the beds, removing every weed, beautifying our little paradise. Sweat poured down our sun-drenched bodies. Soon we were both half naked. "Oh yes, it's so hot!" Eleanor stretched and pulled her top over her head, left in just a pink bra. "Babe, let's go for a dip." I laughed and nodded affirmatively. Eleanor unhooked her own bra, and it slid off her shoulders. Her sagging breasts were freed. I licked my parched lips, beholding this sight. At that moment, I caught a glimpse of the movement out of the corner of my eye and whipped around. There behind the bushes stood Lisa, trembling and pressing her palms to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock and horror. She had seen everything. Eleanor followed my gaze and gasped, trying to cover her nakedness. "Lisa! Darling, it's not what you But Lisa had already turned and fled in tears. A few minutes later, she returned with a suitcase in her hands and flatly stated, "Have a nice trip, you degenerates. I'm leaving you perverts. You'll receive the divorce papers in the mail." With those words, she turned and walked away. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I stared blankly into the distance with a haunted gaze. It was all over. She was gone. After that fateful day, Lisa did indeed disappear from our lives. A letter with the marriage contract and a request for a divorce soon arrived. Eleanor and I tried to move on, but the pain and guilt never left us. Our sinful affair, born of loneliness and desire, cost us dearly in the end.